The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital corridor hummed with the kind of persistent buzz that made the air feel thick and unreal. I had been sitting in the stiff plastic chair outside room 314 for 3 hours. Nurses walked past with clipboards, families whispered nervously by the vending machines, and the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. Finally, Victoria appeared. Her heels clicked sharply on the linoleum, each step deliberate, like punctuation marking a conclusion. She didn't sit. She just stood, perfectly poised in her tailored suit, surveying me with the kind of disdain that made my chest tighten. "How is he?" I asked, standing. Through the glass window, I could see Dad lying in the bed, connected to a web of machines. His usually commanding presence seemed smaller under the hospital blankets, almost fragile. "He's stable for now," she said, folding her arms. "But we need to talk." "Talk about what?" Victoria's voice was calm but cutting. "Mom, David, and I have discussed the situation. We think it's better if you don't visit anymore." I blinked. "What? Don't visit Dad. Don't call. Don't show up at the house. You're dead to us." The words landed on me like a physical blow. "Victoria, what are you talking about? He's my father too." "Is he?" Her tone was icy. "Fathers usually leave something to their children in their wills. Fathers usually don't cut a son out of the family business. Fathers usually don't erase one child from existence, not even in family photos." I swallowed hard. It was true that Dad and I had been estranged for 5 years, ever since I walked away from Fletcher and Associates, the accounting firm he had built from scratch. I had told him I was starting my own company instead of taking over his legacy. "He's been asking for you," I said softly. "No, he hasn't." Victoria's smile was sharp. "He's been delirious from the medication. The nurses say he's calling for someone named Michael, but David and I made sure they know that son no longer exists." "You told the nurses Michael Fletcher died 5 years ago when he abandoned the family." I stared at her. This was the sister who used to braid friendship bracelets for me, who used to sneak me extra dessert when Mom wasn't looking. Now she stood there declaring me dead. "Victoria, we've had our differences, but..." She laughed, though there was no warmth in it. "Differences? You walked out on Dad when he needed you most. You started a competing firm. You stole 3 of his biggest clients. I didn't steal anyone. They chose me." "Same difference," she said, checking her Cartier watch. "Look, I don't have time for this. Mom's flying in from Phoenix. David's handling the business. I'm managing Dad's medical care. We don't need complications." "Complications? You mean me," I said quietly. "You're afraid that if Dad recovers, he'll want to reconcile. That he might bring me back into the company." She didn't respond, but I saw a flicker of confirmation in her eyes. "There's nothing to bring you back to," she said finally. "You made your choice 5 years ago. What if I want to see him anyway? Then you'll be arrested for trespassing. I've already spoken to hospital security." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Michael, don't bother trying to contact any of us. We've changed our numbers." Her heels clicked away, leaving a silence that pressed in on me. I watched Dad through the window. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and for a moment I just breathed with him. Then I left St. Mary's, not for home, but for my office in downtown Chicago. My office overlooked the Chicago River from the 40th floor of the Merchandise Mart, Fletcher Financial. Consulting had grown far beyond the one-man startup I had founded 5 years ago. My assistant Sarah looked up as I entered. "Michael, I thought you were taking the day off. Change of plans. Get me the Morrison account files, the hospital chain." She hesitated. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine. Just need to review some contracts." 30 minutes later, I had the Morrison healthcare files spread out across my desk. They owned 12 hospitals across Illinois, including St. Mary's. 3 years ago, they were near bankruptcy due to a Medicare fraud scandal. I had restructured their debt, created a recovery plan, and personally guaranteed a $50 million line of credit that had kept them afloat. I called Harrison Morrison, their CEO. "Harrison, I need patient information for Robert Fletcher. Room 314, who has medical power of attorney." There was a pause. Then Harrison confirmed Victoria had been granted power of attorney, but Dad's bills were being covered by a combination of Medicare and a supplemental policy through Fletcher and Associates. The same firm struggling financially since I left. Next, I called my banker to check Fletcher and Associates' account. The balance was $847,000, overdrawn, and the line of credit maxed at $2.3 million. They had been in default for 6 months. Everything started to make sense. Dad's medical bills were enormous. The business was failing. They wanted me gone to prevent any claim on the assets. But they had made a critical mistake. I called St. Mary's directly. "This is Michael Fletcher. I'm listed as the primary guarantor for Robert Fletcher's account. Change the authorization. Victoria and David no longer have decision-making power. Everything goes through me." The hospital confirmed it. I leaned back, looking out at the Chicago skyline. My family had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. An hour later, Dr. Sarah Kim, Dad's attending physician, called. "Mr. Fletcher, your father's condition has deteriorated. Emergency cardiac surgery may be needed, and we need authorization from the person responsible for his care. I'm on my way. Hospital security has my permission to remove anyone unauthorized from his room," I said grimly. 18 minutes later, I arrived. Victoria, David, and Mom clustered around the nurse's station, flustered. Security confirmed my authorization and asked the rest of my family to leave. I watched Victoria turn pale as the truth sank in. She no longer controlled anything. I walked into Dad's room with Dr. Kim. The surgery took 4 hours. I spent most of it thinking about the call I had received 3 years earlier, when Dad, quieter than I'd ever heard, asked for help with financial difficulties. I had said yes, even though we hadn't spoken in 2 years. When Dad awoke, I was there. His eyes were confused but slowly focused on me. I took his hand, feeling how frail he had become. "Dad, businesses fail. People make mistakes. It doesn't erase your years of success." He listened, nodding, slowly understanding the sacrifices I had made to protect him. Victoria and David had been cut off completely. For the first time in 5 years, we were no longer divided by lies and fear. The surgery ended just before midnight. I sat in the hospital waiting area, nursing a cup of the worst coffee imaginable, my mind running over the phone call I'd received 3 years earlier. Dad's voice, quiet and strained, had asked for help with temporary financial problems. He hadn't asked for reconciliation, just assistance. I had said yes without hesitation, even though we hadn't spoken in 2 years. At the time, Victoria had no idea I would step in behind the scenes. During the second hour of surgery, my family disappeared. I assumed they had left to regroup, to figure out how my sudden control over Dad's affairs would affect their plans. I was alone with my thoughts, reviewing every detail of Fletcher and Associates' financial situation in my head. Victoria and David had no idea that I had been monitoring everything, ensuring Dad's survival not just medically, but financially. When Dr. Kim finally returned, she had news. "Mr. Fletcher, the surgery went well. Your father is stable in recovery." I nodded, relief flooding through me. "Can I see him now?" "He's still unconscious, but you can sit with him if you like." I stepped into his room. Dad looked smaller than I remembered, surrounded by the monitors and machines that tracked his every breath. His hair had turned completely white, and his face showed lines I hadn't seen before. Lines of worry, fatigue, and the invisible burden of a life spent building something only to see it crumble. I pulled a chair beside his bed and waited. At 6 in the morning, he stirred. His eyes opened, confused and unfocused. "Michael?" "I'm here, Dad," I said quietly. Victoria appeared in his peripheral vision. "He said I was dead to you." "I know," she murmured. Dad tried to sit up, but the tubes and machines restricted him. I leaned in closer. "Dad, I've been getting your calls." Victoria had them forwarded to my office. "She told me you were drunk dialing, that you didn't really want to talk to me." "That's not true," he whispered. "I know, Dad. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of what you built. The company, the clients, the legacy, it's more than just numbers. It's the lives you've touched." The words lingered in the quiet room. 30 years of complicated history compressed into a single moment. He took a shaky breath. "I know about the business. I know some of the financial problems. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to think... To think what? I asked, gently taking his hand. That everything I taught you about business was wrong, he said, his voice cracking. I squeezed his hand. Dad, businesses fail. People make mistakes. That doesn't erase 30 years of success. You asked for help 3 years ago, and I've been helping ever since. Victoria just wanted to keep it secret so the situation wouldn't complicate her plans. He closed his eyes, processing. Plans? Yes. Victoria and David had been managing your finances. They didn't want you to know the truth. They thought that if you realized I was paying the bills, you might reconcile with me. That would complicate things. What things? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. The financial situation at Fletcher and Associates. David and Victoria were keeping information from you. The company was $3.2 million in debt. Loans were defaulting. Clients had been alienated. Without the payments I've been making, you could have lost everything 2 years ago. The heart monitor beside him beeped faster. I continued calmly, explaining everything over the next hour. The failed business ventures David had invested in without telling him. Victoria's mismanagement, the hidden loan defaults, the lapses in insurance, all of it had been carefully concealed. Their plan had been clear. If you died, life insurance would cover debts. If you recovered but remained estranged from me, the company could be liquidated without interference. If we reconciled, I might ask uncomfortable questions about missing funds. Dad listened, silent for a long time. And now? He asked finally. That depends on what you want, Dad. I want to see you succeed. I want to support you. Victoria and David made their choices. They chose money over family. They will have to live with the consequences. 2 days later, Victoria showed up with a lawyer. Michael, we need to talk, she said, attempting calm. I don't think we do, I replied. I was sitting beside Dad, assisting with physical therapy exercises the nurses recommended. You can't just take over Dad's life like this, she protested. I'm not taking over anything. I'm just not hiding anymore, I said. The lawyer stepped forward nervously. Mr. Fletcher, my clients believe there may have been undue influence in the recent changes to your father's medical arrangements. Dad, sitting up in bed, spoke first. I'll handle this. His voice was stronger, steadier, the one I remembered from childhood. Victoria, David, I know about the business. I know about the debts. I know what Michael has been doing to keep the family afloat, Dad said, turning his gaze to them. Victoria's face drained of color. We were protecting you, she tried. You were protecting yourselves, hoping I would die so the life insurance would solve your financial problems, Dad said, cutting through the excuse. The lawyer cleared his throat. Those are serious accusations. They're facts, Dad said. He reached for the folder of financial documents I had brought. I've reviewed everything. Michael has been paying our bills, protecting us, while David and Victoria mismanaged the business. David finally spoke. We were trying to save the business by taking out loans, forging signatures, lying to creditors, anything to keep it afloat. For what? I asked. Your salary alone was $200,000 from a company losing money each month. How could that work? Victoria tried to interject, but Dad silenced her. I'm done listening. Michael, what do you need from me? Over the next week, everything was restructured. Fletcher and Associates was dissolved. Remaining assets were liquidated to pay creditors. Dad joined Fletcher Financial Consulting as a senior advisor, bringing decades of experience and contacts loyal to him personally, not the failing firm. Victoria and David were cut off entirely. No access to Dad's finances, medical information, or legal affairs. 6 months later, Dad and I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports. Fletcher Financial Consulting was now the fastest-growing financial services firm in Chicago. I asked about regrets, specifically regarding Victoria and David. Dad looked out the window at the Chicago River. I regret that it took a heart attack for us to have an honest conversation. I regret letting pride keep us apart for 5 years, but I don't regret learning who my children really are. They were scared. People do desperate things when scared. Michael, there's a difference between greed and desperation. I nodded. I understood now why I had acted. The line between family loyalty and business loyalty had been blurred for too long, and I had been the one to untangle it. A year after the confrontation at the hospital, the tension in my office broke when Victoria called. Sarah told me she sounded nervous, unsure if I would agree to meet. I thought about it carefully. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. I gave Sarah instructions to provide her with my personal number. Her voice on the phone was smaller than I remembered. Michael. I wanted to apologize. I waited. Go on. I never wanted it to go this far. I didn't want things to break the way they did. What do you want, Victoria? I want to explain. I want you to understand why we did what we did, she said. We arranged to meet at a downtown cafe, neutral territory, a place where neither of us had memories attached. The business had been failing. Dad was ill. She and David felt overwhelmed. That was their reality. We thought cutting you out was the only way to protect what was left, she admitted. I never wanted to take over Fletcher and Associates, I said. I had my own company. But you were always Dad's favorite, the golden child. That's not true, she said softly. You weren't involved in the early years, so you didn't see it. Everything Dad did was to prepare me to run the business. You and David were there, but secondary. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation. I found none. There was exhaustion and maybe a trace of genuine remorse. What do you want from me now? I asked. I want to rebuild. Not the company, that's gone, but maybe the family, she said. What about David? He's getting help for gambling and drinking. He knows he made mistakes. He's working on it. And you? I'm working for a nonprofit now. Financial literacy programs for low-income families. It doesn't pay much, but it's meaningful work. We spoke for 2 hours. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. But it was a start. Victoria would never have access to family finances or business decisions again. But she was still my sister. Someone I had grown up with, learned from, loved despite everything. When I told Dad about the meeting, he was skeptical. She hurt you, Michael. She hurt all of us. I know, but she's still family, I said. Dad considered it carefully. Family doesn't always act perfectly. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes people make terrible choices when scared. Exactly, I said. Sometimes the only way to rebuild is to start over. We agreed that Sunday dinners would become a regular event. Victoria joined eventually once a week. David took longer, but he joined too. Sober, humbled, and working as a counselor for those struggling with addiction. We never spoke of the company. We never discussed money, inheritance, or past grievances. Instead, our conversations revolved around Dad's grandchildren, Victoria's nonprofit work, David's recovery, and the people he helped. It wasn't the family we once had. It was something different, built on truth instead of assumptions, on honesty rather than pride. It was fragile but real. There were moments when I looked around the table and saw people who had once declared me dead to them. And yet, in that new version of family, there was a form of love that had survived. Not the love of perfect relations, but the love that endures through mistakes, misunderstandings, and time. Part of rebuilding was learning to trust slowly. Victoria would never manage finances again. That trust had been broken too badly. But rebuilding personal relationships, visiting Dad, attending dinners, supporting each other's work was possible. She came to terms with the consequences of her actions. She had lost influence, but she gained perspective and the chance to reconnect honestly. David, too, was learning. He faced his demons with professional help, taking responsibility for his past mistakes. He became a counselor, sharing his experiences with others, working to prevent the same errors he had made. Over time, his presence at the family table became consistent, sober, and constructive. Dad watched it all unfold. He had learned the true character of his children. One son had protected him and the family's legacy quietly and diligently. 2 others had acted out of fear and greed. But even so, he saw that people could change if they were willing to face their mistakes. We began planning simple family activities. Small dinners, weekend lunches, walks in the park. We avoided anything that resembled business or money discussions. The lessons were clear. Family is about presence, honesty, and responsibility, not inheritance or legacy. Victoria sometimes reflected on the mistakes she had made. She realized that her fear of losing control had driven her to wrong choices. She admitted she had underestimated me and overestimated her control over the family's fate. Each acknowledgement helped rebuild trust in small increments. David admitted his failings publicly, both to Dad and the rest of the family. He acknowledged the gambling, the lies, the financial mismanagement. Facing the consequences made him stronger, more aware, and more empathetic. It also gave us a foundation to rebuild a relationship with him without fear of hidden agendas. Meanwhile, I continued to manage Dad's medical needs and finances responsibly. He had recovered from surgery and his health stabilized. Every decision I made was transparent. I allowed Dad to participate in discussions about his treatment and finances. I provided him with all the information Victoria and David had previously withheld. This transparency helped restore his trust, not just in me, but in the possibility of family functioning properly. Months later, our family gatherings became predictable. We shared stories, celebrated milestones, and quietly worked through unresolved emotions. We didn't attempt to erase the past. Instead, we learned from it. Each conversation, each dinner, each small act of kindness built the foundation for a stronger, more honest family unit. Dad often reflected on the lessons we learned. "I regret that it took a heart attack for us to speak honestly," he told me once. "But I don't regret seeing who my children truly are. Fear and desperation can drive terrible behavior, but they can also teach humility and resilience." I understood his meaning. The past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped intentionally. By setting boundaries, holding people accountable, and fostering open communication, we created a family dynamic that could endure. Victoria, now working for a nonprofit, shared her successes with the family. David shared his recovery milestones. We celebrated the good without judgment, acknowledged mistakes without bitterness, and ensured that everyone felt valued for their growth rather than punished for past missteps. I realized that wealth, power, and legacy were meaningless without family cohesion. The business could fail, fortunes could be lost, but rebuilding trust, accountability, and open dialogue mattered more than any asset. By the end of the year, our family dynamic had shifted completely. I no longer saw Victoria and David merely as siblings who had betrayed trust. They had become people capable of change, accountable for their mistakes, and willing to engage honestly. We had created a new version of family, imperfect, cautious, but rooted in truth and resilience. Dad smiled at our Sunday dinners, a man who had learned the difference between favoritism and fairness, fear and courage, loyalty and responsibility. We had survived deceit, illness, financial mismanagement, and estrangement. And yet, we emerged closer than before. Not because the past was erased, but because the present was addressed honestly. We avoided any discussion of inheritance or business beyond what was necessary. Instead, we focused on stories, achievements, and shared responsibilities that strengthened bonds rather than caused conflict. In retrospect, everything that happened, the estrangement, the financial collapse, the medical crises, served as a catalyst. It revealed character, clarified values, and ultimately rebuilt trust. Victoria and David had learned lessons in humility. I had learned lessons in forgiveness. Dad had learned lessons in perception and accountability. By the end of that year, our family dinners became a sanctuary of sorts. We laughed, argued gently, shared memories, and planned for the future. We knew the fragility of our bonds, but we also understood the power of honesty, responsibility, and compassion. The family we built wasn't perfect. It was better, realer, rooted in truth rather than assumption, in accountability rather than pride, and in love rather than fear. We survived not by avoiding mistakes, but by confronting them and choosing how to respond. And that, in the end, mattered more than anything else. By the time a year had passed, our family had settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but good. Sunday dinners became a fixture, a moment of stability in what had been years of chaos. Victoria attended regularly, sober and clear-minded, contributing her stories about nonprofit work and her efforts to educate communities on financial literacy. David came too, finally confronting his past with honesty, attending therapy sessions, and guiding others through recovery. We never revisited the old business disputes. Fletcher and Associates no longer existed, dissolved entirely to satisfy creditors and prevent further misuse. Dad was no longer the head of that company. He was a senior advisor at Fletcher Financial Consulting, using his experience and reputation to guide my firm's growth. This arrangement kept him engaged and valued, without putting him back into the toxic environment that Victoria and David had once created. Dad and I often sat together after dinners, reviewing reports or discussing new strategies for my firm. He was proud but cautious, always reminding me that mistakes could still happen, but lessons had to be learned from every misstep. Our conversations no longer carried the weight of resentment or unspoken grievances. There was relief, even joy, in speaking freely, in knowing that past conflicts no longer defined our interactions. Victoria occasionally spoke of guilt. She admitted she had been motivated by fear and desperation, convinced that she had to control every aspect of the family's affairs to protect the remnants of a failing business. Her voice carried shame, but also a determination to make amends. "I underestimated you, Michael," she said one evening. "I thought I could manage everything alone. I was wrong. I can see that now." I acknowledged her words without judgment. The point wasn't to punish, but to understand, to create a space where honesty could thrive. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about seeing the person for who they truly were and accepting their effort to change. David's transformation was slower but consistent. He openly addressed his gambling and drinking issues, attended weekly support sessions, and volunteered to counsel others facing addiction. Watching him work through his struggles reminded me of the importance of accountability. Change was not instantaneous. Recovery required effort, humility, and recognition of past mistakes. Dad watched these transformations quietly. He had initially feared that trust once broken could never be restored, but over time, he saw progress. He recognized that people could learn from fear, greed, and misjudgment. The same children who had once turned against him were now working on rebuilding their characters, guided by responsibility and conscious reflection. Family life continued without drama over inheritance or business. Conversations revolved around shared experiences, like grandchildren, community projects, and hobbies. The focus shifted from material concerns to relational ones. We learned to celebrate each other's achievements without envy, to support each other without strings attached, and to offer guidance without judgment. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly reports, Dad leaned back and said, "Michael, I regret that it took a heart attack for all of this to happen. But I don't regret seeing the real character of my children." I nodded. Fear and desperation can drive terrible choices, but they also teach lessons in humility and resilience. "You've seen it firsthand." He smiled faintly. "I suppose that's true. I just wish we hadn't had to endure so much pain to get here." "We can't change the past," I said. "But we can shape the future intentionally and honestly. That's what matters." Over the following months, Victoria and I occasionally discussed her nonprofit initiatives. I supported her work, offering guidance on financial planning without exerting control. It became a collaborative relationship, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. She started to regain a sense of autonomy without falling back into manipulative patterns. David's path remained challenging. Some days were harder than others, but he faced them with transparency and courage. He admitted when he faltered, sought help immediately, and shared his experiences openly. His journey reinforced the family's commitment to honesty and accountability. Through it all, Dad remained a steady presence. His wisdom and experience guided us, but he allowed us to manage the day-to-day dynamics ourselves. He trusted the structure we had built, even when it diverged from the expectations he had for Victoria and David. He learned that love doesn't always mean control. Sometimes it means stepping back, observing, and trusting that lessons are being learned. By the second year after the hospital incident, our family dinners had solidified into a comfortable routine. We discussed community events, children's education, and shared interests. We celebrated milestones and supported each other through challenges. We did not dwell on past mistakes. Instead, we acknowledged them, learned from them, and committed to behaving differently moving forward. One evening, after dinner, Dad said quietly, "I'm proud of all of you, not just for success, but for honesty and growth. I see my children taking responsibility, and it gives me hope." Victoria and David both nodded, understanding that pride was no longer about achievement or status. It was about integrity, accountability, and rebuilding trust. I realized that the family we had now, imperfect as it was stronger than the one we had before. We had survived deception, illness, and estrangement. We had learned that love could endure mistakes, fear, and betrayal if guided by honesty and compassion. Dad often reflected on the lessons of that year. "I regret that it took a medical crisis for us to confront reality," he said. "But I don't regret the clarity it brought. I finally understand my children and my role as a father in ways I never did before." Through these reflections, I understood that reconciliation was a process, not an event. It required patience, humility, and courage from all parties involved. Victoria and David had demonstrated growth, but so had I. I had learned to forgive without condoning, to lead without controlling, and to trust without relinquishing responsibility. 6 months later, we celebrated a small family reunion at Dad's home. Victoria, David, and I cooked together. We laughed, shared stories, and supported each other in ways that were intentional and genuine. Dad watched quietly, content in the knowledge that, despite past hardships, the family had found its way back to each other. It wasn't perfect. Arguments arose occasionally. Misunderstandings happened, but each time we addressed them openly. We did not let pride or fear dictate our responses. Each conversation reinforced the lessons we had learned over the previous years. Our family's new dynamic was a living testament to resilience. We had endured separation, betrayal, financial crises, and health emergencies. And yet, we emerged stronger, not because the past was erased, but because we had chosen to confront it, understand it, and grow from it. Victoria eventually became a trusted friend again, though never in a position to influence finances or medical decisions. David remained committed to his recovery, sharing his experiences with others and providing support for those struggling with addiction. Dad thrived in his role as senior advisor, offering wisdom and guidance while enjoying the stability of our reconciled family life. He expressed pride not in wealth or status, but in the integrity, courage, and honesty we had cultivated. I looked around the table during one Sunday dinner and felt something I hadn't in years, a sense of genuine connection. This wasn't the family we had grown up with. It was a new family, built on the foundations of truth, responsibility, and forgiveness. It was real, imperfect, but deeply meaningful. The lessons were clear. Material wealth and business success mean little without trust and honesty. Fear and desperation can drive terrible choices, but confronting mistakes, taking responsibility, and embracing change can create bonds stronger than any prior attachments. By focusing on shared experiences, open dialogue, and support, we rebuilt a family capable of facing future challenges together. We had learned that mistakes don't define a person. How they respond to mistakes does, and sometimes, survival itself is an act of love. As we sat around the table, talking and laughing, I realized that the version of family we had now, honest, accountable, and resilient, was better than the one we had lost. It was more worthy of our love, more authentic, and more enduring than anything we could have preserved through pride or fear. The heartache, the betrayal, and the estrangement had forged a new understanding. We had endured the worst moments and emerged with clarity about who we were, what we valued, and how we would move forward. In the end, It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving, rebuilding, and choosing to love with eyes wide open. That choice, I realized, was the most powerful legacy anyone could leave. We had survived, together.